Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of WPC. The opportunity for all of us in this room to help our customers enable digital transformation has never been greater. And as Satya talked about yesterday, at Microsoft, our goal is to enable our customers and our partners to achieve this digital transformation by delivering on 3 core ambitions. Today, I'm going to kick off the morning by talking about the work we're doing to build the intelligent cloud platform and how it'll enable you, our partners, to accelerate your businesses by making your customers even more successful. Kirk Koenigsbauer is then going to talk about the work we're doing to deliver the reinvention of productivity and business processes. And then Yusuf Mehdi will cover the work we're doing to enable more personal computing. We're in the midst of a generational shift in computing, and it represents major changes for everyone, Microsoft included. And every organization over the next few years is going to need a strategy for how they go from where they are today to take advantage of what the cloud offers. Organizations are going to look to adopt cloud-based productivity and business app solutions that enable employees to be even more successful and to reinvent business processes. Organizations are going to look to build new applications that enable them to engage better with their customers, optimize the running of their businesses, and take advantage of cloud-based infrastructure to achieve even greater agility and cost savings. And organizations are going to take advantage of the new data and intelligence technology, things like machine learning, advanced analytics, IoT, cognitive services, to unlock insights about their data and enable intelligent action from it. And all of this is going to need to be done in a way that they can ensure that all these solutions are delivered in a secure way and can be managed holistically. And it's really the combination of all these scenarios that enable organizations to become more agile, to lower their costs, and really differentiate and transform their businesses. And the Microsoft Cloud is unique in delivering on all of these different scenarios. No other cloud offer out there offers the breadth and depth of what the Microsoft Cloud delivers. And we deliver all of this with a global, trusted, and hybrid promise that's truly differentiated in the industry. Now, as I mentioned, the Microsoft Cloud is a global hyperscale cloud platform. And over the last several years, we've been hard at work expanding it to run all over the world. And the circles on this map here indicate what we call Azure regions, which are made up of clusters of data centers where you can run and deploy your code and your solutions. We now have 34 unique Azure regions around the world. Put this in perspective, this is more locations and countries than AWS and Google combined. And this enables you to run your applications and your solutions closer to your customers than ever before and compete in even more geographic markets. What makes each of these regions really impressive is the sheer size of many of them. This photo here is one of our US East data center regions. And to give you a sense of the scale and size of the facility, check out that thing circled in the bottom right. That's actually a very large truck. This is the same region from a different angle and highlights the expansion currently underway there. This region will ultimately be more than a mile long and host 700,000 servers. And we're continuing to invest billions of dollars a year to build out new infrastructure like this, and our cloud platform now manages literally millions of servers around the world. And this enables you to build solutions without having to worry about your cloud platform's capacity, and enables you to scale your solutions to literally any size. Now, the Microsoft Cloud is optimized for organizations and the partners that serve them. And for us, enterprises are not an afterthought. They're a core critical design point. And it's not just about the technology. Microsoft has decades of experience supporting businesses and enterprise customers of all sizes. And this means we really understand the critical requirements of running software for businesses, including certifications, data sovereignty, security, and privacy. In fact, the Microsoft Cloud has more compliance certifications now than any other cloud vendor out there. The Microsoft Cloud is also the only global public cloud vendor licensed to operate legally in China, and the only public cloud offering that provides full data sovereignty guarantees in Germany. And unlike other cloud vendors, we're also German partners there. And unlike other cloud vendors, we're also unique in that we enable cloud solutions to be deployed not just in our hyperscale data centers, but also in customer and service provider data centers as well. And our Azure Stack offering enables you to stand up a consistent cloud platform experience with the same management APIs, the same portal, and the same set of developer services available in our full public cloud Azure. And our hybrid cloud promise extends beyond just infrastructure to also include data, application platform, identity, productivity, and business app solutions. And this enables partners and customers to maintain maximum flexibility as they journey to take advantage of cloud-based technology, and enables you to use a common set of skills and assets along the way. Now, we're delivering all of these services and features with differentiated capabilities. Gartner publishes their Magic Quadrant surveys, where they independently measure and evaluate technologies across multiple vendors. Today, the Microsoft Cloud is a leader in 17 different Magic Quadrant surveys, more than AWS, Google, and Salesforce combined. And all of these combined capabilities are leading to some tremendous adoption of the Microsoft Cloud right now. 85% of Fortune 500 companies are now running their businesses using the Microsoft Cloud. And these are just a handful of some of the logos on this slide. And the Microsoft Cloud provides the best cloud for partners to target both enterprise customers as well as business organizations of any size. Microsoft has always been and always will be a partner-centric company. And the cloud provides an even bigger opportunity for all of us in this room to deliver even more value to our collective customers, help them transform their organizations, and to grow our businesses together. There are now tens of thousands of partners providing managed services using the Microsoft Cloud, applications running on the Microsoft Cloud, and integrating their unique solutions with the Microsoft Cloud. And this past year, more than $45 billion of partner services revenue was attached to Microsoft Cloud and enterprise products and services. And the Microsoft Cloud is going to continue to grow and accelerate this partner opportunity even further. Here's a few interesting statistics that we're seeing in terms of existing Microsoft partners who are adopting the Microsoft Cloud. On average, they're seeing their revenue growth double, with a 1.8 times increase in recurring revenue. And for software vendors delivering SaaS-based solutions on Azure, they're now seeing an average gross margin of greater than 65% profit. And part of why we're seeing the success is just the programs we have in place to really drive partner success. With the Microsoft Cloud Solution Provider Program, collectively called CSP, we enable partners to own their customers' journey to the cloud and deliver end-to-end managed services-based solutions. This means partners can own creating the cloud subscription and partner offer for their particular customer. They own setting the price, the terms, and directly bill the customer. And it also enables partners to be the first point of contact for all customer support. And for partners creating repeatable IP, we enable integrated marketplaces that enable you to reach even more customers with your solutions. Tens of thousands of partners today are now transacting solutions through the Office Store, the Windows Store, as well as the Azure Marketplace. And these marketplaces enable you to deliver solutions directly to Office knowledge workers, to Azure admins and developers, as well as to Windows users, in an experience that's integrated directly into the products that they use every single day. This week, we're also really excited to introduce our new Microsoft AppSource marketplace. AppSource makes it easy for business users to discover, trial, and acquire business SaaS solutions. And it provides partners with the ability to create business solutions that can integrate across the entire Microsoft Cloud, including Office 365, Dynamics 365, as well as Azure, and get highly qualified leads from Microsoft for them. And what I'd like to do is show off a cool demo of it and invite James Phillips on stage to highlight what you can do with AppSource. Here's James.
Thank you, Scott, and good morning, everyone. So, I think of all the announcements that we made last week running up to WPC, perhaps AppSource for me was the most exciting, and I think perhaps the most relevant for partners trying to connect with business customers who are looking for solutions to their problems. AppSource does a number of things. It provides a conduit through which we're going to deliver users to our partners. We'll ship hundreds of millions of users to AppSource via Office 365, Dynamics 365, Power BI, Power Apps, Microsoft Flow. All of those services will use AppSource as their native get new apps capability. And through that movement of users through this service, we also offer the ability for our partners to show off their solutions. And so AppSource does a number of things. Number one, it is a place where business users can discover applications that are perhaps unique to their role. Here I'm selecting customer service, and to their industry. So if I select government and I scroll down, you can see there are a number of solutions that are available immediately in AppSource that fit my role and my industry, allowing me as an end user to immediately try these solutions. And part of AppSource is a provisioning system. And so when you build these applications on our cloud platform, AppSource gives users the ability to discover and solution providers the ability to then provision for trial and ultimately deployment of their solutions. It's very easy to sign up for AppSource. You can see list an app here. So as a partner, if you've built an app on our platform, you can simply go to appsource.com, click on list an app, and you'll be guided through the ability to onboard your solution, whether it's a SaaS application or it's an offer from an integrator partner. So let's take a look at one of these solutions. You saw Ducks, I think, dancing around on stage earlier, the guy in the red jacket. His application, AppPoint Citizen Service, is in AppSource. And so let's go ahead and act as an end user and click try. I agree to a few terms of service, hit continue, and now right now, what's happening is, in the background, Citizen Services got deployed, a CRM instance got deployed in the back end. We wired up Cortana Analytics to an IoT stream coming from smart streetlights, and I'll talk about that in a second. And we created a Power BI embedded instance on the back end. And so this entire application got stood up, wired up, and made available to me as an end user in seconds. And I can begin my trial immediately. Super exciting. So let me just show one piece of this application. If I go to the admin portal, you can see that Citizen Services, ultimately what this application provides for is for local governments to engage with their citizens. And so it provides the ability to report streetlight outages, potholes, that sort of thing. And through the CRM integration and through IoT and Cortana Analytics provides the ability to understand what's happening, to roll service trucks, to do field service, and then to have a portal that reports back to citizens when their reported incidents are being addressed. And so if I look here quickly at dashboards and reporting, you can see that Power BI is actually coming up and showing a lot of information about the city and the in-flight work that's been reported, streetlights, et cetera. And so AppPoint was able to very, very quickly and easily build in world-class business analytics into their service, powered by IoT, powered by Cortana Analytics, and to stand all of that up very, very quickly for end users. So it's super easy to build compelling applications on the platform, and then really, really easy for end users to connect with those solutions and deploy them. The last thing I'll say is that when I did this, when I deployed this application as an end user, a lead was automatically sent back to AppPoint, in fact, into their CRM system directly. So you can wire your CRM system up to AppSource, and anytime a customer comes in, deploys, and begins using your application, leads are delivered right to you. Really easy to sign up, super compelling offer. Go to appsource.com, click sign me up, and we'll take it from there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. We launched AppSource just a few days ago and had more than 200 apps in the marketplace on the initial day of launch. And we've had tremendous activity since then, and are adding new apps literally every single day. And as James mentioned, the great thing about the system is every time someone signs up for an app to try it, that's a qualified lead that goes to the partner. And we're starting to send huge amounts of leads now to all the partners inside AppSource. And we'd love to work with you to help accelerate your solution delivery even more. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity for all of us in this room to transform customers' businesses and make them even more successful with it. Now, in addition to AppSource, this week at WPC, we're also talking about a bunch of great new offers that Microsoft's providing over the next year. These span across all of our products and services, and collectively, again, it's going to enable us all to accelerate our businesses together. Now we've looked at the Microsoft Cloud offers all up from a partner perspective. Let's now dive deep into some of the individual partner opportunity scenarios that the Microsoft Cloud offers in more depth. And what I'd like to do is start by looking at some of the types of application innovation opportunities that we think is enabled with Azure. Now, Azure is Microsoft's cloud computing platform and enables you to move faster and do more. You can choose to use Azure just for infrastructure and use it just for like base compute, storage, and networking and virtual machines. But you can also take advantage of a coherent set of highly engineered and fully managed services to build your apps and solutions even faster. And our cloud platform and tools together deliver unmatched productivity and enables you to move faster and be even more successful. One thing that's really important to call out is that Azure is a truly open platform and supports the ability to target multiple devices, use multiple operating systems, programming languages, frameworks, data services, and tools. And this slide here highlights just some of the technologies you can leverage to build Azure solutions with today. And with Azure, you can use the best of the Microsoft and the Windows ecosystem and the best of the Linux ecosystem together and really be able to use the best tool for the job as you're building your solutions. And each year with Azure, we release hundreds and sometimes thousands of new services and capabilities. This list here is just a small sample of some of the new capabilities you can take advantage of to build even better solutions. You know, one of the recent additions I wanted to highlight is our recent acquisition and integration of Xamarin. Every organization out there right now is looking to engage better with their customers. And with mobile app solutions, you can literally put your business now in your customer's pocket. And Xamarin is used by companies both big and small to build and deliver fantastic native mobile application experiences, ones that work on iOS, Android, and Windows devices. What I'd like to do is just show a quick video highlighting some of the customers that are seeing tremendous success with Xamarin.
Xamarin allows our team to get to market faster than our competition.
Xamarin is a platform that works for native development on iOS, Android, and Windows.
It allows us to not need to focus on all the different development tools, but allow us to write a better code and provide better features.
Xamarin Test Cloud allows us to push our app to over 2,000 real devices, both mobile phones and tablets, across a matrix of operating systems and device types so that we can get the kind of coverage we would never be able to support in-house. Pinterest is a very visual tool to be testing, so Xamarin makes sense in terms of its live devices testing the physical app just like a user would use it. Working with Xamarin Test Cloud is giving us the confidence to get to our next 100 million users.
With 2.3 million daily active users, there are a lot of people that rely on Slack. Finding issues and bugs and being able to report that really shows the value of the automation that we're building.
The Xamarin Test Cloud had the ability to run automation against a huge device library that they offered, as well as the reporting back that Xamarin gives us after the tests are complete is very detailed, allows us to look at different types of app usage data, battery usage data, and then of course looking at the actual stack traces of failures and logs was extremely important as well.
We have a great collaboration with LEGO, which is trying to enable students to find that love of engineering through robotics. The combination of Visual Studio, .NET, and Xamarin provide that very scalable bridge from desktop to mobile.
If I can write one piece of code and it works everywhere, that makes me very happy.
Xamarin is sick. It's crazy the kind of stuff you can do with this product.
We have fantastic partners here at WPC that are using and integrating with Xamarin today. And we'd love to grow this ecosystem even further now that Xamarin is part of Microsoft. And we think the combination of Xamarin plus Azure provides an incredibly powerful way to deliver fantastic mobile-based cloud solutions to customers. Now, mobile app solutions are just one of the many types of different solutions that can be delivered with Azure. And this week at WPC, we're launching a new Azure Solutions section of the Azure.com website that helps both customers and partners learn more about solutions that Azure can enable. It highlights some of the most common types of solutions being deployed on Azure today. For each of these solutions, then, you can drill in, and it highlights some of the customers that are taking advantage of it, as well as some of the unique value that they're getting from it. We've also integrated as part of this our partner solution section into each of the individual solutions. So for example, partners who deliver software solutions are prominent on all the pages, and we also provide detailed reference architectures that help explain to customers how the end-to-end solutions can be delivered with their solutions. So for example, you can hear CMS partners that are integrated along with other Azure services. And then for each solution, we also link directly to partners who can help deliver and manage the implementation of the solution for customers. And we also then provide qualified leads from our inside sales teams to partners for each of the solutions. And we'd love to work with all of you to integrate your products and your services as part of this experience. And again, we think there's a huge opportunity for all of us as part of this. Let's actually watch a quick video of one of our partners here and as they're talking about the types of practices that they're now enabling with Azure that's growing their business.
Key Forensic Services provides forensic support to law enforcement organisations throughout the UK. So what does that mean for our IT systems? They need to be available 24/7. They need to be accessible by the scientists that need them. And ultimately, they need to be secure. The cloud gives us the opportunity to do that. So we're talking about 500 devices up and down the country being operated by police forces, being managed, controlled, upgraded with secure data flow from the device back to Key Forensics. Nobody has done this anywhere in the world.
Extrinsica Global is a cloud solutions provider. We specialize in delivering unique, complex hybrid cloud solutions for our customers, built on Microsoft Azure, Office 365, and our own Microsoft Cloud Platform in our data centers, which we call EV3. We've chosen to specialize not just in the design and build of hybrid cloud solutions, but also then to be able to manage, operate, and support those solutions on behalf of the customer, so that what we deliver to them is a complete end-to-end service that they simply consume. Being a Microsoft Cloud Solutions provider has transformed our ability to deliver complex hybrid cloud solutions at almost any scale globally.
I think the key issues that we identified with our IT system have been resolved and have been removed from our risk register. The vulnerability that we had has gone. We've replaced it with security, with control, with flexibility, and with a can-do attitude from our service provider. And it's completely transformed the way we now move forward with IT projects.
Let's switch gears now and talk about some of the other great capabilities that we're enabling with the Microsoft Cloud. Specifically the ability to use data and intelligence to infuse richness into every application. More and more data is being created in the world today, and there's an ever-increasing need to be able to derive insight from this data and be able to turn it into intelligent action. And to really achieve that, you need to be able to progress from using data to understand what happened, to understand why it happened, to predict what will happen, and most importantly, understand what action should you take based on it. And with Azure SQL Server 2016, Power BI, and our Cortana Intelligence Suite, we deliver an incredibly rich set of data, analytic, and cognitive services that enable customers and partners to build fundamentally smarter apps. You can store and process any volume, velocity, or variety of data, and run real-time analytics and machine learning algorithms against it. And as you saw in Satya's keynote yesterday, we're also now delivering higher-level cognitive services like speech and vision APIs as part of this offering as well, and which you can use to easily integrate into any solution to deliver a much richer experience. And once you gain insight on top of this data, you can then create value from it by turning that insight into intelligent action. And with Office 365, with Dynamics 365, and our new Power Apps offering, we provide great productivity solutions that enable you to orchestrate business processes and do just that. And partners and customers are delivering some truly amazing solutions using all of these capabilities. One of the iconic engineering companies in the world is Rolls-Royce, and they build just phenomenal engineering machines that are used for a wide variety of different scenarios. Probably one of them that we are all using to come to and from this event is the aircraft engines that they place inside airlines. And one of the things that they've been looking at doing is how can they go ahead and to those airlines provide even richer set of capabilities and provide finished services that they can deliver that make the airlines even more profitable and successful. And what they've done is built a fantastic solution using Azure IoT, taking advantage of the machine learning and advanced analytics capabilities of the Cortana Intelligence Suite, embedding Power BI directly in terms of the UI that they expose to their customers, and then integrating the solution as part of our field service with Dynamics CRM. And what this means now is, they can provide to their airline a fully finished solution that enables the airline to be able to see how their planes are being operated. They can drill in and understand what is the operating characteristics of all the engines inside the airline. They can predict ahead of time when there might be a problem and require proactive maintenance. And then the beauty is they're able to surface that visually, again, using Power BI directly to the end user as part of that experience. And then when there is something that needs to be scheduled or coordinated, they've integrated as part of with the field service capabilities of Dynamics 365, so they can go ahead and proactively schedule mechanics and work items all as part of this integrated experience. And we're super proud to be able to partner with Rolls-Royce, and it's just a fantastic solution that's really transforming how airline aviation will work going forward. Schneider Electric is another great partner of ours who's using the combination of Azure and the Cortana Intelligence Suite and Power BI to deliver innovative energy management solutions all over the world. What I thought I'd do is just show a quick video of them talking about one of those implementations.
About 1.2 billion people in the world live without electricity. Another billion have unreliable power. Energy is critical for powering basic social services like healthcare and education. Today, Schneider Electric is transforming the lives of millions of people in Nigeria by partnering with Microsoft and the Lagos State Electricity Board to provide sustainable solar power to over 200 schools and clinics. Now, computer labs operate all day, and students are able to charge devices, extending learning opportunities after sundown. Clinics are able to properly refrigerate vaccines and medications, and medical care is available around the clock. With the Internet of Things and cloud-connected energy solutions, reliable access to power is no longer a dream. Today, Microsoft and Schneider Electric are empowering life-changing solutions worldwide and enlightening the future for millions.
What I'd like to do is invite Janet Kennedy on stage to do a demo of the Schneider Electric solution. Here's Janet.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. Thank you. One of the biggest challenges facing Nigeria today is its power supply. To give you some context, the population of Nigeria is roughly 177 million people, but only half have access to electricity. And the current infrastructure only produces 2,800 megawatts of electricity, which for the Canadians here in the room is equal to the power used by the city of Halifax, a city with only 0.03% of Nigeria's population. So to survive, most use private diesel generators, which account for 2/3 of the country's electricity. Even those fortunate enough to have electricity face chronic outages. A doctor, only 20 miles outside capital city, receives an energy bill for 4 months, but only received electricity for 1. So let's think about that for a minute. 3 months out of 4 with no electricity. Imagine not being able to store life-saving pharmaceuticals or perform critical procedures on patients because of something as simple as a lack of electricity. In fact, 60% of health clinics lack reliable electricity, and even further, 65% of primary schools have no electricity at all. Until now. Schneider Electric is transforming the lives and opportunities of millions of people in Nigeria by providing a reliable, sustainable, and affordable energy. Let's take a look at their connected solar solution. Today, Schneider Electric is supplying electricity to over 200 schools and health clinics. Many of these have locations in extremely remote locations, and they've never had electricity before. They're equipped with solar panels and battery banks and connected inverters that provide a continuous supply of electricity. Proactive remote monitoring and device management is critical. Monitoring is done through the Global Infrastructure Dashboard. Here we see some of the most important KPIs across the region, monitoring the health and the performance of our infrastructure. But if you look at the left side, we can see alerts and escalated issues that are sorted by severity for our attention. At the top of this list is a medical clinic showing a critical warning. Let's select this location and see what's going on. Here you can see at the site level a schematic of the entire facility. All assets are tracked for health and performance metrics against the expected and forecasted benchmarks. We can see here to the right some firmware updates and setting updates that we can push down to the equipment at the site. With a click of a button, we can keep the assets up to date like never before. Thanks to the new device management capabilities of the Azure IoT Suite, we no longer have to send technicians out to these remote sites. This dashboard makes it immediately obvious that there's some critical issues with the batteries and the solar panels. The system is forecasting that with the current trend, we could take an outage, putting patients at risk. So let's take a look at these alerts. Cortana Intelligence takes real-time data from sensors and devices and runs complex analytics to predict future trends and behaviors. The brand new Power BI Embedded provides rich visualizations to help us interpret the data. Here you can see the first alert shows that the solar panels are not charging at their optimal level due to sand and debris on the panels. If this trend continues, they won't be able to keep up with the demand. If you look at the bottom, the batteries are starting to overheat due to lack of ventilation. So let's go over here and click Create Site Notification. The system automatically creates a notification with all of the relevant information pre-populated. The recommended action down here on the left is to clean the solar panels and ensure adequate ventilation for the batteries. We confirm these instructions and send them to the site manager for immediate action. So let's step back and reflect for a second. In a world where access to electricity is far from certain, Schneider Electric has not only provided continuous, reliable energy to this clinic, but it's also simplified the maintenance. Instead of repairing old, decrepit diesel generators, they are now dusting off solar panels and turning on a fan to cool off the batteries. Thanks so much to Schneider Electric, Nigerians now have access to better healthcare and education. By providing reliable electricity, something most of us in this room take totally for granted, they're empowering millions of Nigerians across the country to achieve more and have a brighter future. Thanks so much. Back to you, Scott.
Great. It's amazing now what you can do with data, and the opportunity with IoT coupled with the rich set of data and analytics services that we now provide as part of Azure and our Cortana Intelligence Suite really enables just some fantastic solutions. We're pleased this week to actually announce the general availability release, both of our SQL Data Warehouse solution now on Azure, which allows you to stand up a data warehouse literally in minutes and run to even a petabyte in terms of size, as well as that Power BI embedded capability that you saw both in the Rolls-Royce as well as within the Schneider Electric demo are now available for everyone to use in a general availability form. Now let's switch gears now and talk about some of the other great capabilities that are provided with the Microsoft Cloud, specifically the ability to secure and manage cloud and mobile-based solutions. With our enterprise mobility and security offering, we enable now employees to use the devices and apps that they love while keeping their organization secure and compliant. It supports securely deploying and managing thousands of different SaaS applications across iOS, Android, and Windows devices, and it integrates very well with Office 365. In fact, 40% of the Office 365 install base now has EMS today. And this huge install base provides incredible partner opportunity. And this growth is continuing to accelerate with the over 2x the growth rate of our competitors in this space. And organizations around the world are increasingly looking for ways to secure their businesses even more. And to meet these needs, we're continuing to add richer and richer security services and capabilities into EMS. And what I'd like to do now is invite Julia White on stage to show off some of the great new capabilities that we're actually introducing and delivering here this summer. Here's Julia.
Thanks, Scott. Now I'm going to show you two new security areas. First, information protection, and then SaaS application security. And both of these are part of the enterprise mobility and security offering, particularly the new E5 offering. Now I'm going to start with information protection. Now previously, we've had Azure Rights Management for the encryption of content and keeping that safe. We are now adding classification and labeling and bringing that together into the new Azure Information Protection. And I'm excited to announce that this is actually in public preview as of today, so you can actually all go check it out now. Now I'm going to start and show you what this looks like. So here I'm in Word, and I have the Azure Information Protection add-in running. So you see this document has a label here, this classification that it's internal. Now this is the default status that's set up for any document that I start. But in this case, I'm actually doing a pretty sensitive document. So I want to upgrade and increase the security around this document specifically. So all I have to do is simply click this edit, and I'm given a number of standard options, again, very simple from a user experience. In this case, this is pretty top secret, so I'm going to go ahead and choose the secret. And in case it's for finance only, so I'll select that. Now when I do that, I get this footer that automatically tells me the document is secret, and I get this watermark across this. Now this stays with this document. Wherever it's shared, wherever it's posted, it's automatically part of that document. Now that was a very simple user experience, and we know to get user adoption, it has to be that simple. But there's this perennial problem of getting users to do this. So we also know that automatic classification and labeling is really the next step in where we want to go. But it has to be done in a way that the users have control and able to have some access over this as well. So let me switch over to Excel and show you the automatic classification and labeling experience here. So in this case, I'm doing some personal expenses. It's a personal Excel file. Again, I have that add-in, so you see by default its status is internal. Now maybe I want to actually put my credit card number in here, so I'm going to just paste that in. And when I hit save, you'll see that I actually get a notification that that automatic classification has happened. It's now been bumped up to confidential based on having credit card information. And if I go to the backstage, I see that protection has been applied automatically to the document based on the content. Again, very simple, all happens for me. But I mentioned this is actually a personal file, so I need to change this because it's not appropriate that it's marked confidential. So again, as a user, I'm given an option to control that. So I can go in this case, choose personal. But I'm actually prompted. I have to put a justification for this. So I, as a user, have control over it to have the right level of security, but my organization has all the auditing and information they need to make sure the right information is going to the right place. Again, a very nice user experience, but also all the security we need to make sure the organization is safe. So that's Azure Information Protection. Now let me switch over and talk about SaaS application security. So we know that employees are bringing lots of SaaS applications to the workplace, and that's great. They want to stay competitive, stay agile. But of course, IT needs control to manage and have visibility around what's going on with all those SaaS applications. That's where Microsoft Cloud App Security comes into play. It enables organizations to discover the number of SaaS applications being used, investigate what's happening inside those applications, and then apply the appropriate security policies. So here I'm running a Cloud App Security, and I've run a discovery. And this requires no agents. It just looks at log files. It's very simple to use. So I found that I have 512 SaaS applications discovered. And we find with many of our customers, there's a lot more SaaS applications being used than they ever imagined. And I get a view of all the SaaS applications in my organization, and I'm given a score. And this is a score of the security profile of that application, 10 being the highest. So let me look at Office 365 specifically. And if I open up, you see I get a number of attributes, giving me very granular detail around the security profile of this SaaS application. And I can go down to a number of things. You see this level of attributes. We have this level of attributes for 13,000 SaaS applications within Cloud App Security. So virtually any SaaS application being used, we can give you this level of information. Now that's great that I can see the security profile and decide which SaaS applications I want to endorse as part of my company's use. But I also want to understand what's happening within those. So let me go into the investigation area. Well, in this case, I want to see what files are being shared outside publicly from those SaaS applications. So in this case, I'm going to just sort on anything that's shared publicly. And now, again, it's looking across all those SaaS applications, and I'm finding a number of files that are being shared publicly. So that gives me some concern. So I want to go ahead and apply some policies and controls on top of that. So let me go into my policy panel. And I have a number of policies running to monitor and understand what's happening inside and outside of those SaaS applications. This first one here is about looking for any publicly shared information that has credit card information in it. I want to be notified of that. And in fact, I've found 2 matches for this policy. So I'll go ahead and go in there. And I see I found 2 files. Now, this first one is a test file, and this is what our security team put in place to make sure that this policy was working. So that file is OK. But this one here looks like a different document, a payment schedule. And you'll see if I open it up, Cloud App Security is actually pulling that metadata from that SaaS application, so I can see it right here. And I can even go and view the hierarchy. I can see exactly where that file sits in which SaaS application. Now, in this case, it's sitting out in OneDrive, and it's in a customer file with credit card information being publicly shared. That's not right, so I want to go fix that. So all I have to do, again, right here within the same console, I can go ahead and remediate the situation. I can put the user in quarantine, or more importantly, make that file private, that simply. So I'm able to discover the problem, investigate what's happening from a file perspective, and remediate the situation all within the same dashboard across all of my SaaS applications. Now, this is just a few of the parts of the new security capability we've added to the enterprise mobility and security offering. There's lots more in the security area as well. And with that, back to Scott.
As customers make the journey to use the cloud, one of the things that they'll grapple with is figuring out how to manage it, especially when it's running in multiple cloud environments. And a lot of customers will use both Azure and AWS. A lot of customers will be using both Hyper-V as well as VMware and OpenStack on premises. And with the Microsoft Operations Management and Security product, or OMS for short, we provide a great management solution that enables customers and partners to manage their VMs and servers in this multi-cloud world. OMS provides an integrated multi-cloud solution that enables log analytics, automation, backups, disaster recovery, as well as integrated security analysis and reporting. And we're delivering it as a service, which gives both partners and customers a single control point in the cloud that they can use to manage literally any environment. This is a sample dashboard, for example, that customers can use to look across their different environments. It gives them a single pane of glass in which they can monitor the health of their VMs and their applications, regardless of where they're running. Whether on-premises or in the cloud, Windows and Linux VMs, Azure, AWS, Hyper-V, and OpenStack. Both OMS and EMS are now available through the Microsoft Cloud Solution Provider Program, which means managed service providers can use these technologies, both OMS and EMS, for their customers and basically own the complete end-to-end customer relationship and be able to combine, they really provide ways that you can help your customers be even more successful with cloud-based solutions. So just to close up, the cloud provides an enormous opportunity for all of us in this room to deliver even more value to our collective customers, help them transform their organizations, and to grow our businesses together. And we at Microsoft are committed to making sure we have the best cloud for you and the best cloud to partner with. Partners have always been the backbone of our success, and we would not be able to succeed without you. And I'd like to say a huge thank you for everyone coming to WPC this week, and we're very much looking forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you, and have a great day.